The plane vibrates slightly as it taxis down the runway. The hum of nervous chatter fills the cabin, a mix of passengers settling into their seats for what they assumed would be a routine flight. But then, a voice cuts through the noise. A loud, "Angry man in row 14, you don't belong here." He sneers, his tone dripping with venom. He points directly at Elijah Carter, seated across the aisle. "Why don't you go back to where you came from?" The words hang in the air like smoke after an explosion. For a moment, time seems to stop. Passengers glance up from their phones and magazines, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some pretend not to hear. Others stare openly, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Elijah feels every syllable like a punch to the gut. His jaw tightens, but he forces himself to remain still, gripping the armrest beneath his tailored suit. Inside, though, a storm brews, anger, frustration, and something deeper. It's the weight of years of microaggressions, dismissive glances, assumptions about who he is based solely on the color of his skin. He exhales slowly, trying to steady himself. Not now, he thinks. Not today. This was supposed to be a quick trip to close a major acquisition, seal the deal, and return home to his family. Instead, he finds himself face to face with yet another reminder that no amount of success can shield him from prejudice. Elijah reflects on his journey, the countless boardrooms dominated by people who look nothing like him, the subtle and not so subtle ways he's had to prove himself over and over again. Being the only one isn't just isolating, it's exhausting. And now here he is, reduced to defending his right to sit in a seat he paid for, in front of dozens of strangers. Around him, passengers wrestle with their own dilemmas. A young woman bites her lip, torn between speaking up and staying quiet. An older man shakes his head disapprovingly but says nothing. The flight attendant hesitates, caught between diffusing the situation and escalating it further. Their silence speaks volumes, a collective failure to act, a societal complicity that allows hatred to fester unchecked. Amidst the tension, Elijah notices someone watching him intently. Near the front of the plane, in first class, sits a man whose gaze seems sharper than the rest. There's an intensity in his eyes, a quiet determination that stands out amidst the chaos. When their eyes meet briefly, Elijah feels a flicker of curiosity, and maybe even hope. Who is this man? Why does he seem so invested in what's happening? As the confrontation continues, Elijah's thoughts drift beyond the confines of the airplane cabin. He thinks about his ancestors, generations of black men and women who endured far worse indignities without the luxury of speaking out. How much has really changed since then? Racism may wear different masks now, but its roots run deep, entangled in systems, institutions, and everyday interactions. This isn't just about him anymore. This isn't just about one rude passenger on one commercial flight. This is bigger than that. This is about the countless others who've faced similar attacks, who've been told they don't belong, who've had to fight tooth and nail for dignity and respect. If Elijah lets this moment pass without standing up for himself, what message does that send to the passengers around him, to society at large? His grip on the armrest loosens slightly. Something shifts inside him, a spark of resolve igniting in the darkness. No matter how this ends, he knows one thing for certain: he won't let fear dictate his response. Not today. The mysterious man in first class rises from his seat, stepping forward with purpose. His presence commands attention, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Elijah feels a glimmer of solidarity. Whatever happens next, he realizes, might depend on both of them. Together, they could turn the tide against hatred, or at least try. For now, the tension simmers, unresolved. But Elijah knows this is only the beginning. Greg Lawson wasn't backing down. His voice boomed through the cabin, each word laced with hostility. "This isn't over," He snapped at the flight attendant who had cautiously stepped forward to intervene. "You're clearly taking his side." The flight attendant, a young woman with a nervous smile, held up her hands in a placating gesture. "Sir, please lower your voice. We just want everyone to feel comfortable on this flight." "Comfortable?" Greg scoffed, jabbing a finger toward Elijah. "How am I supposed to feel comfortable when he doesn't even belong here? He's probably sitting in someone else's seat." Elijah clenched his jaw tighter, feeling the weight of every eye in the cabin bearing down on him. The states were suffocating, some curious, some judgmental, others indifferent. He knew what they were thinking. Was he causing trouble? Did he deserve this, or was he simply another victim of prejudice? "I have my boarding pass right here," Elijah said calmly, pulling it from his pocket and holding it up for anyone nearby to see. His voice was steady, but inside, his heart raced. This wasn't just about proving where he belonged, it was about proving who he was. A successful executive, a man who had worked tirelessly to climb the corporate ladder despite the odds stacked against him. Yet none of that mattered now. All anyone saw was his skin color. Greg barely glanced at the ticket before dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "That could be fake for all we know. You people always find ways to game the system." The comment stung more than Elijah cared to admit. It wasn't just the insult. It was the implication behind it. That somehow as a black man he couldn't possibly have earned his place. Not on this plane, not in the boardroom, not anywhere. Passengers began murmuring among themselves. Some whispered defenses of Elijah under their breath, while others nodded along with Greg's accusations. One older man leaned over to his companion and muttered, "Maybe he should just move. It's not worth the hassle." Hearing those words hit Elijah like a punch to the chest. He thought back to countless meetings where similar sentiments had been expressed, not outright hostility, but subtle dismissals. Comments like, "Are you sure you're ready for this role?" Or, "Let's get a second opinion on your proposal." Each one chipping away at his confidence, making him question whether he truly belonged. And then there was the fear, the gnawing dread that this moment might go viral. What if someone recorded it? Would strangers online rally to his defense? Or would they tear him apart, questioning everything from his professionalism to his character? Or worse, what if no one cared at all? If this incident faded into obscurity, swallowed by the endless scroll of social media feeds? Just as Elijah wrestled with these thoughts, a new voice joined the fray, a young woman seated a few rows away. She spoke hesitantly at first, almost apologetically. "Actually, I think I heard him arguing earlier. Before any of this started, he seemed really upset." Elijah froze. He hadn't said a word to anyone before Greg's outburst. How could she accuse him of something so blatantly false? "She's lying," Elijah said firmly, turning to face her. "I've been working quietly since I boarded, but the damage was done." Other passengers exchanged uneasy glances, doubt creeping into their expressions. Even the flight attendant looked unsure, her earlier attempts at mediation faltering. Betrayal burned deep within Elijah, not because of the lie itself, but because it revealed how fragile allyship could be. People claimed to support equality until it became inconvenient or risky. And now, thanks to one cowardly accusation, Elijah felt more isolated than ever. Then, a commanding voice cut through the tension. "Enough." All heads turned toward the front of the plane, where a tall, broad-shouldered man stood. He wore a military-style jacket and carried himself with an air of authority that demanded attention. "If Mr. Carter isn't safe on this flight," the man continued, addressing the crew directly, "then none of us are. Either remove the disruptive passenger or prepare for legal action." His tone left no room for argument. For the first time since the confrontation began, Elijah felt a flicker of hope, but it was mixed with confusion. Who was this stranger, and why did he care so much? As Greg sputtered indignantly, the man introduced himself, "Daniel Harper." retired Marine colonel and civil rights advocate. Turning to Greg, he added, "And you must be Gregory Lawson. Your firm has quite the reputation for opposing diversity initiatives." Greg's face paled. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your work with lobbyists who've actively campaigned against inclusion programs, including ones targeting Elijah's company." Daniel's gaze hardened. This wasn't random racism. It was calculated intimidation. Someone wanted to rattle him before his big meeting. Elijah's mind raced as the pieces fell into place. This attack wasn't personal, it was professional. Someone higher up didn't want him succeeding, and they'd used Greg as their pawn. The realization ignited something within Elijah. Fear gave way to anger, and anger transformed into determination. If they thought they could break him, they were dead wrong. "You picked the wrong person to mess with," Elijah said, his voice low but unwavering. For the first time, he met Greg's glare head-on, unafraid. "I've faced bigger challenges than you, and I've won." Daniel stepped closer, offering Elijah a small nod of solidarity. In that moment, an unspoken bond formed between them. Two strangers united by a shared mission to challenge injustice. For now, the immediate conflict remained unresolved. But Elijah felt stronger, more empowered. Whatever happened next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, sharp and urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be making an emergency landing due to unforeseen circumstances on board. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." The announcement sent a ripple of tension through the cabin. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, whispers spreading like wildfire. Elijah felt the weight of it all pressing down on him. The stares, the murmurs, the knowledge that this moment was about to define him in ways he hadn't anticipated. He leaned back slightly in his seat, gripping the armrest as conflicting thoughts raced through his mind. Should he stay silent, let this incident fade into obscurity, and hope no one outside the plane ever found out? Or should he seize control of the narrative, turning humiliation into empowerment? The choice loomed large, heavy with consequences. You can't let them win," Daniel said quietly from where he stood near the aisle. His tone was firm but encouraging, cutting through Elijah's inner turmoil. "This isn't just your fight anymore, it's everyone's." Elijah looked up at Daniel, searching his face for reassurance. "What if I'm not strong enough?" he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if they twist my words, make me look like the bad guy?" Daniel crouched down slightly so their eyes met. "They already tried that, but you're stronger than their hate. Trust me, you have a chance here to show people what real courage looks like." Something in Daniel's words struck a chord deep within Elijah. He nodded slowly, resolve beginning to replace doubt. Pulling out his phone, he opened a livestream app and took a deep breath before speaking. "This isn't just about me," Elijah began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "It's about every person who's ever been told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. We've stayed silent for too long, letting fear dictate our actions. Not today." His words resonated instantly, drawing gasps and nods from some passengers nearby. As the live stream gained traction online, comments poured in, some supportive, others skeptical. But Elijah kept going, refusing to back down. "This man," he gestured toward Greg, whose face had turned pale with rage, "didn't attack me randomly. This is systemic racism at work. It's calculated, intentional, and designed to break us. But we won't let it." As the video spread, something remarkable happened. Passengers who had remained silent earlier began speaking up, corroborating Elijah's account. One woman, tears streaming down her face, approached him hesitantly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I lied before when I said you were arguing. I was scared of what might happen if I stood up for you. But I see now how wrong I was." Her admission added authenticity to Elijah's story, shifting public opinion further in his favor. Meanwhile, Greg grew increasingly isolated, his earlier bravado crumbling under the weight of collective truth-telling. People avoided eye contact with him, whispering angrily among themselves about his behavior. In the midst of the chaos, Daniel stepped closer to Elijah, his expression softening. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "My son, he faced discrimination his entire life. He was brilliant, talented, but the system kept pushing him down until he couldn't take it anymore. He took his own life last year." Elijah stared at Daniel, shock and sorrow washing over him. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, unsure of what else to say. "It's why I'm here," Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Why I couldn't sit idly by while someone else suffered the same fate. Your fight, it's not just yours, it's mine too. And together, we can make sure no one else has to endure what my son did." Their shared pain forged an unbreakable bond between them. For the first time since boarding the plane, Elijah felt truly supported, understood. Together, they vowed to use this moment as a catalyst for change, holding institutions accountable for perpetuating discriminatory practices. Passengers watched in awe as the dynamic shifted entirely. What had started as a humiliating encounter transformed into a powerful display of resilience and unity. Even those initially hesitant to get involved found themselves reflecting on their own roles in challenging or enabling racism. As the plane descended, hope rose among its passengers. A movement began to take shape, sparked by one man's refusal to stay silent in the face of hate. Elijah knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it head-on. Justice wasn't just taking flight, it was soaring higher than anyone could have imagined. Elijah sat in his office, staring at the documents spread across his desk. The pieces finally fit together. A tangled web of deceit, linking Greg's lobbying firm to his own company's CEO. It was all there, emails, financial records, and internal memos, showing how the CEO had secretly funded anti-diversity campaigns, including those targeting Elijah's division. His hands trembled as he leaned back in his chair, trying to process what he'd uncovered. Betrayal burned deep within him. Not just from the CEO, but from a system that allowed such corruption to thrive unchecked. This wasn't just about one man. It was about an entire structure designed to keep people like him down. "Is something wrong?" Daniel asked, stepping into the room. He'd been helping Elijah dig through the evidence, but even he seemed unprepared for the intensity of Elijah's reaction. "It's him," Elijah said, his voice tight with anger. "Our own CEO. He's behind this. He's the reason I was targeted on that plane." Daniel's face darkened. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." Elijah pushed the documents toward Daniel. "Look at this. Every move we've made, every initiative to promote diversity. He's been working against us from the start." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "What are you going to do?" Elijah stood up, pacing the room as his thoughts raced. "I can't let this slide. If I stay quiet, nothing changes. I have to take this fight directly to him." The next day, Elijah walked into the shareholders' meeting with determination etched into every step. The boardroom buzzed with murmurs as he took his seat, clutching a folder filled with damning evidence. When the CEO began his usual speech, "About growth and innovation," Elijah interrupted. "Before we proceed," Elijah said, standing up, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, "there's something everyone needs to see." He projected the documents onto the screen behind him, exposing the CEO's ties to anti-diversity efforts. Gasps rippled through the audience as the truth unfolded before their eyes. "This isn't just about me," Elijah continued, his tone firm but impassioned. This is about every employee who's ever been told they don't belong because of their race or background. This is about dismantling a system that thrives on exclusion. Employees in the room exchanged glances, then began nodding in agreement. Some raised their voices in support, demanding accountability. The tide turned quickly, leaving the CEO visibly shaken. By the end of the meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove the CEO and appoint Elijah as interim leader. As the gavel struck the table, sealing the decision, Elijah felt a surge of vindication, but also responsibility. This wasn't just a victory, it was the beginning of a new era. In his first address to the company, Elijah outlined sweeping reforms aimed at rooting out systemic bias. "Change starts here," he declared, addressing both employees and executives. "But it doesn't stop here. We need to hold ourselves accountable at every level. No more excuses, no more silence." Weeks later, Elijah found himself standing on a national stage, delivering a keynote speech at a conference dedicated to racial equity. His words resonated deeply, drawing applause and tears from the audience. "We've been taught to believe that racism is someone else's problem," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But the truth is, it's all of ours. Silence only empowers the oppressors. Each of us has a role to play in creating a better future." Standing beside him, Daniel wiped away tears. For the first time since losing his son, he felt a sense of closure. Watching Elijah lead with courage and conviction honored his son's memory in ways he never imagined possible. As the speech ended, Elijah issued a rallying cry. "Racism isn't just one person's problem, it's everyone's responsibility. To fight it, together we can build a world where everyone belongs." The audience erupted into cheers, many rising to their feet. People left the event not just angry about the injustices they'd heard, but inspired to take action in their own lives. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for change, and organizations around the globe began reaching out to Elijah for guidance. Back home, Elijah reflected on how far he'd come, from being humiliated on a plane to becoming a symbol of hope and resilience. He knew the work was far from over, but for the first time, he truly believed change was possible. Justice didn't end when the plane landed. It took flight, carried forward by countless voices demanding equality and unity. And though the road ahead would be long, Elijah knew they were ready to face it. Together, if this story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more content that challenges injustice and inspires change. Together, we can amplify voices that matter and continue the fight for equity and justice. Your action today can spark a movement tomorrow. Don't stay silent. Be part of the change. Hit that like button, spread the word, and join us on this journey toward a better future.